Welcome to the Archives of Information Technology. It's the 20th of February 2017 and I'm in Henley because I'm in the home of Dame Stephanie Shirley. I'm Richard Sharpe, a long-time journalist covering IT and computing. Now, Dame Stephanie Shirley, OBE, is a pioneer of many things in the UK IT sector. And her first job in what we would now call IT was in the Post Office Research Centre in Dollis Hill in London in 1951. What were you doing there?
Well, at the age of 18, I was classed as a scientific assistant, which meant I did a lot of mathematical calculations using one of these big calculating machines, with other people guiding me as to what the formulae were, or whether it was to be graphed or what had to be done with it. Looking back, I realised that was a very, very good training, because I had a boss who was a model to me of what sort of a boss I did not want to be. But one thing he was very good at is that he was meticulous about accuracy, and he would have me write and rewrite a paragraph, or he would demand of me things that were physically so difficult, like drawing graphs on ordinary paper, not graph. He inculcated in me and others the need to provide excellent work. And although it was very simple work, I did learn quite a lot from it, and I studied at evening classes as well. So I was eventually promoted to the next grade, which was assistant experimental officer. And I was paid a little bit more. That's important because I started work at the grand salary of £215 a year. And there were grades that went by age. Try again. Salaries went by grades and age and gender, because there was one grade for men and another grade for women, much lower. And this is the beginning of saying, well, why not? I mean, I'm just as good as the guy sitting opposite me pounding his desk calculator. And I became somewhat assertive, I suppose. I am basically a shy person. I have learnt to disguise that. But certainly at 18, I was very quiet and very shy, and I was just soaking it all in. And
you worked on transatlantic cables, I understand.
Yes. Again, the formulae were given to me by other people, and there were lots of cables, and for each one I did a whole mass of calculations and graphs and stuff like that. Again, I came against this sexism because my job really required me to go on the cable laying ship called Monarch, and they don't have women on ships and so on. And I kept coming across this sort of problem, and eventually became quite aggressive about it. When handsome young men used to offer to carry my equipment for me, I used to reply aggressively, I believe in equal pay and will carry my own things. That's an argument I put to women today, actually. If you want, you've actually got to pay the price of success. But nowadays, of course, I sort of say, if somebody offers to carry something for me, oh, how kind, thank you very much.
You worked on Ernie?
Yes.
Calculated the premium bonds?
That was an interesting role. I was the junior of a team of two who was responsible for the checking of the randomness of Ernie. And of course, this was a project that for 2 years previously had been worked on with various experiments and so on. Each month after the monthly running, we had to check the run and then report formally to Parliament, it used to be, that all was well. And randomness is one of those peculiar things. You can never really prove something's random. It's a sort of Weasley words. There's nothing to say that it isn't random. Typical statistics, but there we go. And I learned a great deal on that, and for the first time started using computers to actually manipulate the vast amount of data. And what we did was pretty simple. We counted the number of ones, and we counted the number of twos, and we checked that all the digits were appearing equiprobability, and then we checked that the combination of digits were, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, all those were appearing with equal probability. And then they got a bit more sophisticated. We took groups of 4 digits and did what was called a poker test, which was, I don't play poker, so forgive me if I get it wrong. Are all 4 different? Have we got 1 pair and then 2 different? Have we got 2 pairs? Have we got 3 the same and 1 different, or something? This sort of thing. So we calculated against the probabilities there. And the last one was called a gap test, which was looking at this long stream of digits and observing the gap between a particular digit's first occurrence and then its next occurrence and then its next occurrence. And of course that should follow certain statistical things. And so that was the sort of tests we did every week. It was interesting for me because it was the first time I'd really had that sort of responsibility. Reporting to Parliament, when it was launched, I went and listened to the Postmaster General, Ernest Marples, announcing it. And a lot of the work was done at Lytham St Anne's, and Ernie there was on display quite a lot, and as the only woman on the team, I was very much to the fore, trying to explain what it was. Most public visitors were more interested in a sort of round device. I mean, the screen, I've seen, it was 10-foot console, something like that, very impressive, lots of flashing lights, and it made woo noises. And but this round object at the corner of the room really attracted a lot of attention, and it was one of the modern vacuum cleaners. So it was all very naive and simple in those days, but it was a wonderful place to work.
And the early computers you worked with were Pegasus?
Well, before that I worked on something called HEC 4.
All right.
I can't really remember much of that. Pegasus was the first one I worked on. I joined the British Computer Society on its inception, and I had asked my boss if I could move into computing. I mean, there wasn't a grade or anything for programming or anything like that. That's right, the British Computer Society had a big conference at Cambridge, and I wanted to go to it. Well, they sent me the answers no. So I took holiday and paid for myself and went. I was always doing this sort of thing, that I wasn't going to be held back by some of these social and norms. Pegasus was the one we used on Ernie, and what I remember there was the sort of sheer excitement of using such a powerful computer. It cost £1 a minute, which for a junior public servant was an enormous quantity. So you really sort of rushed to get on, catch every second, and get off quickly. It was held in, anyway, in the West End, in a lovely Georgian building. You've got this contrast between a Georgian building with an Adams ceiling and this rather ugly Pegasus, and miles and miles of paper tape, which is what we used for storage. And I did learn quite a bit then. I was still very much the junior of the two. but it was a pretty responsible job.
You joined the BCS very early on.
I joined when it opened.
Are you a joiner?
Yes, I am, definitely. There's something about me, I do join, yes.
Right, because of the worshipful company as well.
Yes.
Yes. And you worked on Atlas as well.
Yes, that was the London University Atlas, which was around Euston somewhere. And that was even more enormous. Now it probably has the power of my Apple Watch, but it was called a supercomputer, and I was using it for 2 operational research tasks. One was to do with the scheduling of British Railways freight trains, and the other was to do with stock control. Now, which one would that be, stock control? They were...
But this was commercial work.
Commercial work, yes. So both of those were my company's jobs. I'd started the company by then.
All right. And you left in 1959, Post Office Research Centre, when you got married.
Yes.
Did you have to?
No, there was a certain amount of social pressure. At one time you did have to leave as a permanent civil servant. And there was a delightful remnant of that left, in that if I chose to leave on marriage, I could get out my pension contributions. So I did that, and we got married on the strength of them. But I left really because I didn't want to work at the same place as my husband, who was a physicist working on waveguides, which is how I met him. And why didn't I want to work with him? There was one other dual career couple and I noticed how people reacted to them. If they had lunch together, they'd sort of say, look how unprofessional, they're having lunch together. And if they didn't have lunch together, people would sort of say, I wonder what's going on, they're not lunching together today. So the whole thing was pretty, I thought, unpleasant, so I left.
So you were there 8 years. What would you say the main things that you learnt while you were at Dollis Hill are?
Perfectionism, accuracy, controlling my moods, because at 18 you really are sort of all up and down, really, and you just had to sort of stabilise. I did write some of this down. I've got down here meticulous training. I was trained in a lot of basic things. I used to work with these large sheets of squared paper with numbers all over them, and I developed something called figure sight, in that if I could look at a whole mass and have a feeling that there's something wrong in this area. And I've never been able to explain that. It was very irritating to my colleagues. And I lost it with the years, and I don't work with figures anymore, so all is well there. But I did maintain my love of maths, and they did encourage me to go to evening classes and move on. And
you got your BSc from Sir John Cass College in Birkbeck?
Well, I got my BSc from Sir John Cass, and then did a postgraduate year at Birkbeck, of whom I am an honorary fellow, which was, I think, on logic design or something like that. I was starting off to do a Master of Science, and then I realised that that wasn't going to give me what I wanted, which was acceptance. I needed to get a PhD, and frankly, I could not face studying a PhD part-time. So I studied part-time for 6 years, and that was enough. It's not something that I would recommend to anyone.
And then you moved to Computer Developments Limited in 1959 and worked there until 61. Now, one of your jobs, you were chief programmer there, was that right?
Yes.
So you had achieved something as a woman?
Yes. Computer Developments Limited, always known as CDL, were in Kenton, North London, and they had an unusual director whose name currently escapes me, but I worked for a super guy called John Wensley, who then migrated off to the States. But he was the sort of innovative scientist that I enjoyed working with and working for, and largely working for. He said, where do we want to go, and left me to do it. And I think I learned a lot of management from him. It was casual, it was friendly, it was team working, it was accepting. We had a quiet room, so if you didn't want to be disturbed, you could go and sit in the quiet room and everybody knew you were in the middle of something focused. It was such a contrast to the public sector that I really enjoyed and that I learnt from, in particular working in teams. We were paid by skills, really, so I had enormous, probably my salary doubled when I left the public service, but it was also the environment that I must say suited me.
You're responsible in that role for checking the software for the ICT 1301 computer.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, the 1301 machine that we were using was at Coventry, and the engineers were on it during the day, so I used to work on it at night. And I was newly married, and everybody was expecting me to say, I don't want to work at night. But again, I did, unpleasant though it was. And it was quite eerie turning up at, it was part of GEC in Coventry, a large factory where at night, at 5 o'clock, everybody lined up behind a line with their bicycles, waiting for a hooter to go to leave. I mean, it was a different. We used to sign in and out. I felt very responsible. I had to get through those tests and not hold the overall schedule up where they were developing it and so on. Was it particularly challenging? Not particularly. It was just pressurised from the point of view of commercialism at the time. ICL and GEC had developed this machine between them and funded it. And there was a lot riding on it. It needed to be announced. So I felt that I was very much part of a professional team. And I enjoyed that very much. And I'm still friends with one of the people I met there.
It was a decimal machine, I understand, not a binary machine. And it had pounds, shillings and pence calculations.
I don't remember that at all, and I think it's unlikely. Okay. Honestly.
Okay. Now you're in management. You're managing a small team. Yes?
Yes.
What challenges did you face there?
Possibly I faced fewer challenges than I would have expected, because I was already a high performer. I did clearly outperform my colleagues, and I enjoyed life as well. So people did, I think, enjoy working with me. What lessons did I learn? I learned, I suppose, not to stress my technical competence. And that was something that took me a long time to learn, so they were probably over a period of about 5 years, where when you're suddenly sort of, I can do that, I'll show you how to do that. No, you don't do it like that at all. And as a manager, I eventually learned to be much more, to show my weakness and say, well, this is a bit I can't do. I don't think I have the skills. I wonder if you would like to have a go at it. And that sort of approach stood me in good stead as a manager, and I began to be able to get good work out of other people. What happened was, of course, was that I was no longer doing the software design, which I love, because I was doing management, human resources, finance. And again, it happens to most entrepreneurs.
And did you regret that?
At the time, yes.
It was a loss for you.
There was a short period, and unfortunately I can't remember the years, when I felt I was on the peak of my scientific capabilities and at the same time was a competent manager. I really became only a competent manager because I'm an entrepreneur. I prefer leadership. I prefer doing things for the first time, this day-to-day, quarterly results and so on. I do them dutifully and carefully and accurately and so on, but I don't enjoy them.
You were only 2 years at CDL. Why was that?
Well, I hit the glass ceiling again, and this was this super CDL, which I think I've indicated was a very exciting, buzzy young company doing great work. And again, I found myself blocked. And this time there was an incident, and this time overnight I decided, I've been with a large, good public sector business and had problems. I've been with a small, super high-flying company and have problems. I'm going to set up my own company where this isn't going to happen anymore. And so that was the start of really what became my big contribution to computing.
1962
Yes.
is the great breakthrough year. So overnight you decide to set up your own company and you decide to base it at home. And you have capital, I understand, of about £6.
Yes. It's worth about £100 in today's money. I've looked that up. It was a company that I would have liked to work for. It was a company that I felt other women would enjoy working with. So the first approach was very much sexist oriented. Minute number one in the company's annals was that the company's employment policy should be jobs for women with children. And then as I gradually learned how important training was, that changed to careers for women with children. And it was a different world then, really. And finally, in 1975, when equal opportunities legislation came in, and as an example of unintended consequences, my woman's company had to let the men in. It then became employment policy of people with, domestic, something dependence, people with dependence or something like that. But it was broadened very much.
What led you to that path of thinking initially women only who are based at home?
Oh, I think my own experience. I was able to fish in a pond of 50% of the people who were trained, because women were coming out of the universities with decent science degrees, and it was nobody else was using them, and I thought, well, I can use them, and I wanted to work from home myself.
Who did you recruit first? And how did you recruit them? Did you know them beforehand?
Just trying to remember who the first ones were. No, I don't think the first recruits were. Well, the second batch of recruits, let's put it this way, came as a flood, and they selected me rather than me selecting them. So however the first ones came, it was unimportant because I soon had the pick of very good candidates. And I had this idea of affiliates or consultants. They would not be employed. We even used 0-hour contracts, and I assure you they can work very well for everybody involved. What was I talking about?
Well, let's dig into...
Is this all right?
Yes, this is lovely. This is lovely.
Okay.
Let's dig into the managing women at home. This is a considerable challenge of management, a style of operation that has not been put together before. You don't have any templates to do this with? You're making it up as you go along.
To a certain extent, you're making things up as you go along, but when you're young, everything seems new to you. It was a long time before I realised that. It wasn't me being foolish. Everything actually is new, and you're just at the fringes of scientific knowledge. And I considered getting an MBA because I suddenly found myself running a business and I didn't know how. I didn't know anything about it at all. I didn't know how to price it. I didn't know how to keep records. Hopeless. I had a little book where in the front bit I wrote the money I earned, and in the back bit I wrote the money I spent, and took that to the auditors and expected them to sort it out. So I soon learned better than that. But I felt very untrained, and I wanted to go and do an MBA, but there weren't any in Britain at the time. Excuse me. So I approached a lecturer. I don't think he was a professor. I approached a lecturer called Jack Bungard, who was a lecturer at the Watford Management Centre. It's changed its name since, and suggested that he come and give me a hand and get first-hand knowledge of a new IT service company. And I get the benefit of his academic experience. And that actually worked very well, I think mutually. I learned a lot from him. He taught me how to sell. I mean, he went out on sales calls with me and told me all the things I was doing wrong. Again, typically this business of saying, I know how to do it, rather than sort of saying, well, what is it you would like done? Yeah. So I had a long learning curve there.
And this for someone who you say is naturally shy. And that's a big step into sales.
I think my sense of duty is very strong. And the company, after a bit, was making demands of me. It was no longer providing me the environment that I wanted, but now had a life of its own and demanded that I sell. And so I did. And it demanded that I became competent on finance, so I did. And was driven to a quite extraordinary degree to that I had the feeling that I was carrying all these difficult people on my back just to get their technical skills out of them. Because there was this one that wanted to have children and couldn't, this one who had a learning disabled child, this one had children and didn't want them, this one, I had my learning disabled child who was autistic and became extremely difficult. So it was a sort of, the HR pressures were enormous. What I was, and I think still am good at, is in finding good people before they're demonstrably high achievers and growing them and getting them to do all the work and listening to their ideas. I mean, some of the really strategic ideas did not come from me at all. They came from my colleagues. And so later on, I took the company into co-ownership because it seemed only right and proper that I didn't put any money in. Yes, I worked for the company for years before it got paid, but it became very much a collegiate, cooperative institution that people laughed at. They laughed because at that time software was given away free with the hardware, and they laughed even louder at the idea of a woman doing it from home. What does she think she's doing?
What were the first jobs that you managed to get for this company, which you first of all called freelance programmers?
There was a lot of discussion about what to call it, and the freelance programmers defined exactly what it was. They were a whole group of programmers, and it was in the plural. I intended to grow it. The first task that we got was for a city company called Selection Trust, and I've looked them up and they no longer exist as far as I know. And I was doing program evaluation review techniques again, sticking to this operational research where I wanted to do scientific things, but the market was paying for commercial things. I didn't want to do commercial things because apart from the size of some of the files, it was really quite boring. So we had to compromise on the operations research. And so the PERT work was in that area, and I then started doing PERT work for the Mars sweet company. They wouldn't call themselves that, confectionery. And there was another one we did a lot of PERT for, business operations research, a whole host of things. We got a sort of certain amount of specialism in that operations research stuff.
And you did Tate and Lyle, I think? Was that
yes, we were scheduling their lorries all over the place.
Take me through the pattern of work. So you would try and get a contract for OR.
I think it was... I wouldn't be going for a particular task. I would be marketing, these are the skills we've got. What are the sort of companies that might want these skills? And then approaching them, usually when they were advertising for programmers. And my approach letter said quite clearly, you're advertising for programmers. I'm not after a job, but I can do programming for you. And it was very personalised. I would do it. Or later on, I would manage a team to do it. And then eventually it became a corporate thing.
And this is where you hit on changing your name a little.
Yes, I was launching these letters out by the dozen and really getting next to no response. They weren't very good letters. I used to have a secretary that came in Tuesday afternoons, and she would, again, her brief was to get them going out looking like a chairman of IBM or whatever it was. And she did. She produced a lot of waste paper because that was before the days of word processing. What was I saying, Richard?
You changed your name.
Yes. It was very depressing to get not the no's, but just a no reply. And my dear husband suggested that I use the family nickname of Steve. And so I wrote the same sort of letters, but just signing it as Steve Shirley. And I began to get some replies. And it's a not good commentary on how the world was that day, those days, but I've been Steve ever since, and if it works, it works. It's a form of marketing in a way. I've turned myself into what they wanted.
Do you feel you've changed yourself then?
Over the years, enormously, yes.
Is that a good thing?
I still regret that I didn't go to university, and I would like to do that sort of studying, which the nearest I get to now is in commenting on the computer world or writing speeches or something, which to me is like, lots of research, and then eventually you finish up with a half-an-hour speech that makes some sort of sense. But I certainly changed. And I did feel that I was driven by the commercial world because I was the first woman. And when I went to a conference, the chairman would say, "Good morning, gentlemen, Mrs. Shirley," because I'd always sit in the front row and make sure he saw me, it was necessary really to promote all the time. I was described, probably in Computing or Computer Weekly, as the ubiquitous Steve Shirley, because I did buzz around. I used to do 5 sales calls a day, which is ridiculous, very superficial. But I kept these people happy, I kept them okay, so when they had some work, And I used to do telephone marketing, where I would sit at a table with little cards and the telephone ringing one after the other. I've got notes as to what their equipment was, what we talked about last time, and make sure that my visits were timed when there was the prospect of some work.
This is part of your meticulous approach.
Yes, or practical approach. That was just being practical, nothing very clever about it.
If we look at the IT sector today, you will find a lot more women in the conferences.
Yes.
But not necessarily on the platforms, and not necessarily in the boardroom, and definitely not necessarily at the top of the companies. Why?
Part of the reason is still sexism. People have unconscious biases. They don't really have expectations of their women staff. They encourage them when they're young and pretty, but as soon as they start to be demanding, they're sort of pushed aside a bit. Then you have a career gap when many women leave for several years, or work part-time, or have their attention diverted to family matters. And somehow we never catch up. The other thing that happens, and I'm quite convinced of this, is that women today have no idea what the cost of success is and what they have to do in order to succeed. I mean, I'm continually talking with groups of young and older women as to what simple things they have to do in business to work their way up the corporate ladder. They have to be competent at what they do and be seen to be competent visibly. They have to master marketing and finance irrespective of what they're doing, because without those they have to try and get international experience, because that's what gives them the innovation, so they can come in fresh. And they have to grab the things that are offered for them. I mean, I was invited to be the president of the British Computer Society at a year that was totally and utterly inconvenient. I really thought, shall I say, I can't do it this year, But you have to do it when it comes, and you pay the cost.
You handed over a quarter of the ownership of the company to some employees, I understand.
My aim was to get it 100% staff-owned, and I never made it. It was just an impractical idea, I think. In the 70s recession, we nearly went out of business, and I had this group of associates, consultants, call them what you like, who had no work to do. But who continued to represent the company at conferences and so on. So we were able to keep up a facade somewhat better than the one job that we'd got running at one. We got down to one job for Unilever, as it happened, who was quite a big client. And Unilever took us into international working, because it was Unilever in Thailand, Unilever in South Africa, just Unilever, wonderful company. What was I saying, Richard?
Let me ask you a different question. Did you grow organically?
Yes.
Or did you grow by acquisition?
No, we grew entirely organically. I was talking why I went to. During the recession, the staff helped me so much. And in order to cope with the cash flow of a growing business, I started gearing payments to the staff according to when the client paid the company. And then there was a limit. If the client hadn't paid for 3 months, we paid the staff anyway. And that took away nearly all the cash flow problems, because it was all geared to that. And that made an enormous difference to us. And then when things eased and you realised, well, they've helped take the company and me through those difficult times. Now things are better, they really should share. And the bonus scheme that had started off twice yearly on pro rata to the amount an individual had earned, and had resulted in, I think, 6 batches of letters going out and saying, we've got this wonderful bonus system, but in fact this time your bonus is zilch. When that went, I started thinking in terms of co-ownership, triggered very much by a member of staff who came in, a guy called John Stevens. I met him a couple of years ago, he's still around. And it became this is what I wanted to do. And so I was doing lots of things at once. I was trying to build the business organically. I was trying to get it into co-ownership. I was trying to develop myself, and I was trying to get out. So they were difficult years, and they were long years. It took me 11 years to make co-ownership happen, and that was only up to 26%.
And you decided to float the company. Why?
Pressure from staff, very clearly. By that time we'd got stock out among the senior staff, and they wanted to see that properly valued. They wanted to buy using paper, which up to then we hadn't done. And for that they needed to get a quotation. And it was quite a nasty surprise to me, having handed over, a significant chunk of the business, to then find that they weren't going to just hold it, they wanted to sell it. And I assumed that they would have the same drive as I did, which was a question of control rather than a question of making money. Anyway, that's what they wanted to do, and that's what happened.
It was a successful float.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
Did you begin to lose control?
Oh, yes. Some of it deliberate. Again, I spent about 11 years, the third attempt to manage succession. First of all, there was Suzette Harold to replace me, and I was doing things overseas and stuff. And she got ill and in fact died in service. Then there was Alison Newell, who was again a regional director, who would have been very good running the company, and was very good, really. She was very ethical, but she was running it like I was, a sort of one-man business. And I knew that I didn't want that one-man business anymore. The company had to actually develop some structure. Eventually I used headhunters and got Hilary Cropper, who was a big, big success. And she had experience of running home working, she had experience of running, and she was from ICL, who, as somebody told me, she would have been on the board had she been a male. So she was really highly qualified, and she did, how many years? 8 years, I don't know, but it was a good, and she just took it, made it commercial.
What advice would you give an 18 to 23-year-old woman who wanted to enter the IT sector now?
Well, I'm out of date with what's happening in the IT sector, but find a background company that you enjoy, whether it be advertising or whether it be factory working or whether it be sailing. Get yourself trained, get yourself more trained, and then just go for it.
What's your opinion of the UK IT industry now?
I'm not up to speed at all. I mean, we lost the IT industry, I think, a long time ago in this country.
There's been a lot of discussion. Why did we lose it? How did we lose it?
Oh, I think it was a government thing, really, wasn't it? I mean, the government supported ICL, and then it was acquired by Fujitsu, and then we partly acquired. I think then they bought the whole lot. We've got no computer industry anymore.
What about the software side with companies like Autonomy, for example?
They're doing, yes.
Or the huge success of Games software.
And of course it is the software that in the end is more important. But you've got to have both, and we have no control over the national hardware there.
You were right there about software then, weren't you?
Oh, yes.
Yes. What was the biggest mistake you've made?
Fairly classic mistake. I tried to emulate the success that I'd had in England in other geographies. In Denmark, then in Holland, the Netherlands, and then through a couple of franchises in the States. And it is a classic mistake that people made, and I made it. And I had to eventually close all three of them down.
Why didn't they work?
Different reasons. In Denmark, the facilities for women and the childcare facilities provided by the state were so good that one didn't have that sort of captive labour force that I was used to. In Holland, there were a variety of reasons, really. We eventually sold that to a client. I think it just never made any sort of critical mass. It's a little country. Deliberately little, because I didn't want to start with the States. Because when I got to the States, it was just so big that started with the West Coast and East Coast. I'm still in touch with some of those guys, but I couldn't make it fly.
If you had your time over, what would you do differently in your career?
I would have brought in a finance director much earlier. It was 25 years before we had a finance director. Partly deliberately, I wanted to keep things simple so that I could understand them, because I don't value finances. I don't value money as such, so I didn't really value the financial skills. So I kept it running as a cash business, which in the long run was fine because I built up market share, but in the short term was very much... So I remember when Hillary Cropper came in and we'd spent days and days and I was explaining how the company worked and so on, and she said, oh yes. You do what? She was so surprised at some of the crazy things we did.
There's been a lot of talk recently about the rise of the robot and the rise of artificial intelligence and the threat that makes for people's jobs. Do you think that's a credible threat, or do you think that other jobs will be created?
It's a real threat in the sense that it's going to be change, but other jobs will be created. And, we can talk about whether you're going to have robots paying income tax or something like that in order to keep the public purse topped up. But it's a very exciting time. It's not all that new. I mean, really, some of the things that, what's the Google subsidiaries? Anyway, listening to one of these technical people, I thought, yeah, we were doing that in the sort of, I could see that what we were doing in the 80s was the beginning of that, And you can sort of see a development. I'm using a robot at the moment to teach autistic children, because autism is now what I do. Yes, of course it's very sophisticated. Yes, of course, eventually there will be more and more robot teachers. They won't take everything, but even if they did, it's fine. Kids are learning. And I just find it's a wonderful opportunity, both in the UK and I think internationally.
You do really relish change, don't you?
I think my childhood developed that, yes. I like to do new things. I like to make new things happen.
You helped set up the Oxford Internet Institute.
Yeah.
What was the purpose behind that?
The purpose, or as far as I'm concerned?
Yes.
The purpose of the Oxford Internet Institute was very much to study on a multidisciplinary basis the social, economic, legal and ethical issues of the internet, not the technology. And everybody else was setting up, masses and masses of academic studies. And the bit that I find interesting and I think is important was the social side. And of course that's what I did with my freelance programmers. It was doing something, it was a social business, not a money-making business. And the OII, I don't know how many professors it has now, I go there. I'm going there on Saturday as it happens, but very seldom. It's again, I pride myself on managing succession. I did it in my company much too late with enormous pain. Since then I've done it with the school, I've done it with my charity, I've done it with another charity, I've done it with the current charity that I set up 5 years ago, much more than that now. And once you learn to manage succession, it means I'm free to do the next thing rather than being locked into something that is making demands on me for the next 5 years.
Thank you very much, Dame Steve Shirley. We're back in the archives of the information technology with Dame Steve Shirley. Dame Steve Shirley was born in 1933 in Germany. Her father was a Jewish judge, and he was pushed out of office in 1933 when the Nazis came to power. Dame Steve and her sister left Vienna on a kinder train, one of the special trains full of children leaving Germany in 1939, and she came to England. So you came to England. You knew English by then?
No, I had no English whatsoever. My father had taught me some useful words so that I could say things like slow combustion stove, which are not terribly useful for a 5-year-old, and vine screen viper, but really I didn't know how to ask to go to the bathroom, So it was pretty traumatic, but you learn languages very quickly when you're young, and by September my English was good enough. We arrived in July. By September my English was good enough to go to school.
And you went for one term to a village school.
Yes.
In 1939. Then you went to a Roman Catholic convent.
Well, I should say why that happened, I suppose. My foster parents lived in a sort of suburb of a small town outside in the Midlands. And literally I could walk from their home to this little village school, and it was lovely. But I began to speak with a strong Birmingham accent, and my foster parents were a bit snobby, and we can't have a child of ours, sort of. So they took me out and put me in this private Roman Catholic convent, which actually was lovely. I mean, their values were great. They were kind, and they were really, really super. And I spent my primary years really with them.
4 years you were there.
Yeah.
Where did you get your joy and your expertise in mathematics?
I don't know where it stems from. I think there's some commonality with the law, this very logical, factual, you're either right or you're wrong. And I think this is why a lot of women don't enjoy science, because you can't woolly it, either you're right or you're wrong, and there's morals as well as science. What were we talking about?
We're talking about your love of maths.
Oh, yeah. My love of maths started quite early, because at the Roman Catholic convent, so less than 11, the nuns recognised that I had some gift in mathematics and told my foster, they were lay teachers, they were sort of, black habits and white wimples, but told my foster parents that they were not competent to teach me mathematics, and that they should find somewhere else for me. So I sat examinations and got a scholarship, because you paid for secondary education in those days, and got into a decent grammar school.
In Lichfield?
In Lichfield.
Good solid learning, you say about that?
Yes.
And then you moved another grammar school, Oswestry.
Yes.
From 46 to 51.
Yeah.
So you were boarding there? But it was a day school.
Yes, there was a small annex for pupils who had been evacuated in the main, or whose parents were working overseas or something like that, for them to, I think we had about 30 pupils in a school of 500 or 600. So it was not a good compromise, but it's okay.
And how did your maths do there?
Again, although the teaching was professional there, they had, they couldn't teach me the sort of sixth form level of mathematics. In my innocence, I was only thinking in terms of pure mathematics. I didn't realise that there was another sort of applied mathematics. But I began to say I want to study pure mathematics, and they say you can't because we've got nobody to teach you. And it was quite a discussion and ding-dong, and they eventually put me through some intelligence tests. And the poor psychologist did say that this girl should be studying mathematics. And they arranged for me to go have my maths lessons at the boys' school, because they were then unisex, which was pretty grim, and my days were always disconnected because the timing of the lessons was quite different, so I'd be going out to the middle of one lesson in order to catch the maths lesson at the boys' school. But anyway, we managed it and I got qualified, and that was fine.
And you got through. You got your school certificates.
Yes.
And moved directly into post office research.
Yes.
Where you met your husband.
Yes.
And you decided to leave rather than work together. And you had one son.
Yes. I wanted a large family, and my husband and I were all sort of geared up for fairly conventional middle-class sort of life. I knew I wanted to go on working because I think I've been poor for so long that I like the independence that money gives me, the control. We were living in a small cottage, one of the sort of Rothschild estate brick and flint cottages in Buckinghamshire. And it was fairly idyllic, but I mean, I was trying to paint the outside of the cottage, I was trying to prune the roses, and but in the middle of that, and when I was working at CDL, I got pregnant, and baby number one arrived, hopefully baby number one of 5, and his name was Giles, and he was an absolutely beautiful baby. And I would say that was the happiest period in my life ever, when we had this rather impractical cottage, very picturesque.
What date is this?
59,
Right.
60 or something. All would have been well, except at about 2.5. Giles, a bit like a sort of changeling, moved over a period of days or weeks, I can't really remember, from this very quiet, placid, happy baby to a wild, unmanageable toddler. And it turned out, after many consultants and a 10-month hospital stay, that he was profoundly autistic. And of course that has changed the whole direction of the rest of my life. He with difficulty got some primary education, and then I couldn't find any secondary education for him at all, so he stayed at home with me. Luckily, I'm still working from home, and you can get some sort of intellectual work done when he was asleep, And they were difficult years. I mean, I can remember my husband coming in at the front door and I'd walk out. You know, I was just absolutely hitting the roof with stress. And then we just played box and cocks. I mean, it was terrible. And eventually, when Giles was 13, so he was born in '63, I broke down completely. I finished up in hospital because I was the prime carer. Giles also had to go into hospital. And my doctor said I couldn't leave until arrangements were made so that Giles was not living full-time at home anymore. He, by that time, was 13-year-old. He was violent, he was strong, it was not funny. And that really, I did recover from that, and I talk about my mental health because a lot of people don't talk about their mental health problems, which hit about 1 in 4 people at some stage or the other. And you can recover. And I did, and have made a further life for myself working for Giles, who died at the age of 35, just about when I'd got him living nice and dignified in the community, and which was quite an achievement, really.
And with the success of what became F International, this gave you some money that you could invest in charities and establish charities. So your philanthropic work is focused on autism, is that right?
No, it started off focused on IT and autism. And in fact, some 17 million has gone to IT through the Oxford Internet Institute and through the IT Livery Company and bits and pieces. And over 50 million to autism. And the mission statement was always to be pioneering, never more of the same, no matter how interesting or but also strategic. So something that if it was successful, and some research, a lot of research isn't successful, but if successful, actually makes a real difference for autism. It's not just impacting this one child, this one group. And that's what my life is like now.
What do you do when you're not working?
I don't really do anything.
You just work?
I try and keep fit by swimming. I have some family friends, but I don't see a lot of them. My good friend who's she's just got her 93rd birthday, and we just invited her to a family party, which is rather lovely, very unusual. I haven't been to a party since, I think, her 90th.
And you are a founder of things. You seem to have a drive to found things. Where does this come from?
I think it's... let's try again. The drive to found things is part of the justification that I feel necessary for the fact that I was saved when 1 million children died. And that is as strong today as it was 75 years ago. It wasn't terribly healthy for me as a 5, 6, 7-year-old to be told, aren't you lucky to be saved? Aren't you lucky? Aren't you lucky? But the message got home, yes, I was very lucky. And I decided really to make mine a life that was worth saving. And so I have become, as my father was, for different reasons, I'm sure, a driven person. I am drive. And I like to feel that I've made a difference. I have the culture for the public good. I have the need to make each day worthwhile, that I don't fritter it away on shopping and things. I have my extravagances with clothes or pictures or something like that, but basically I work, and very happy these days. That's what keeps me young, that's what keeps purpose to my existence, which could otherwise be very sterile, my only child having died.
Is there any guilt there that you survived?
Yes, I think I've got over that. There is this survivor guilt, which is always very illogical, that you should feel guilty for having been one of the ones that survived. But I had 6 years of analysis to get me out of that, and I would have thought it was gone now. It's just this dutiful thing, you know. And the livery company, for example, more than anything else, when it occurred to me that I could make a real difference to a livery company in the city of London, some of which are 600 years old, and the IT livery company could be there in 600 years' time. I get an enormous satisfaction of having made my mark. I was here, I survived.
Dame Steve Shirley, you certainly have made your mark. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.